Great. So I'm an early adopter. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and so of course last spring I had to find a way to bring ChatGPT in my classroom. It's a class on democratic theory, and so thinking about tech and democracy is part of what the class needs to be about. But it was really experimental. I did what I think a lot of my colleagues were doing. I had at one point ChatGPT was a student in the course. We would sometimes ask it questions and learn from its mistakes or its refusal to offer judgments, but this was all 3.5 land. Now we're in 4 land. I had the students at moments unpack the ethical guidelines, like David was mentioning, especially asking it, why can't you talk about this particular subject? And he would simply say it's against my moral guidelines, right? So it didn't have a lot of reasoning behind it. And it felt like a bit of whack-a-mole. Sometimes I would look at prompts I assigned, and I would look at unpublished papers, which I knew it hadn't trained upon, or papers that it had a very weak grasp of, or even that it hallucinated about. So for example, the classic paper on bullshit, which is an important paper in democratic theory, has a really important response by the philosopher Jerry Cohen deeper into bullshit. And so the students, if you ask it, notice I even misspelled the article, but I said put it into a syllogistic form. This is a classic hallucination. It thinks that the Frankfurt article, it attributes it to the new Cohen article, gets it completely wrong, and I appreciate the irony that this is basically bullshit about bullshit, second order bullshit. And so that was easy back then, but it almost seemed too easy. And so what I started to do this semester is to think about how I can use it in ways as my co-pilot, asking less how the students use it, but how can I use it? So for 10 years, long before LLM models, I've used Poll Everywhere, and of course it's great to poll students, but when you're doing philosophical reasoning, you want them to offer reasons. You don't want to just offer them prefabricated reasons. And so I have described it as trying to solve the problem of other minds. When I have a class from 50 to 150 or 200, I wish I could know more of the distribution of views among my students, not just those raising their hands. And so what I've typically done is, and this is a 10-year project, is ask every student to answer a handful of questions in the class. And I get a tweet-length result. And that could be about trolley problems. It could be about questions about there's a fire outside, are you free to leave the room? These are classic thought experiments that we use in moral and political philosophy. And in that setting, I'm just trying to turn, there we go. We often give them simple binaries, but I felt like I wanted to get beyond that. And so I'd ask them, here's a block of cheese that fell into Central Park. How do we distribute it? I don't want to give you the 4 ways we could distribute it. I want you to suggest that. And so what I've typically done is simply offered, going beyond binaries, an open set of answers, right? And so the problem is, even for 40 answers, you get a lot of material you have to process extremely quickly, right? And it was good. It would often, I'd peek down, I'd look for an outlier, but I'd struggle. This is a single student, so I could see across their whole class, hundreds of answers and see how they've grown as a student. And I've blocked out the names, of course, for all this. So it was great after class as a kind of post-mortem, but it wasn't scaling in real time. It just didn't give me that. I felt like it was ad hoc. And so it became a kind of congressional record in my class and allowed me to track students' changes over time. But I want help in the moment. And that brings me to my need. And I was talking about this before the LLM models. I wanted a dashboard, something that would be summarizing this information so I can immediately get a sense of the intuitions and the more considered judgments of a larger room. And then this arrived last spring, and it is a superlative summarizer and sorter of views. It has trouble coming up with judgments that it can defend, but on this particular kind of task, I think you'll find it does impress. I'll give it that. So what if it became a kind of co-pilot when we lecture? What if it allowed us to get access to students' pre-theoretical intuitions and their judgments, and I can use them immediately? And what if it actually could identify students' patterns of confusion? Also in real time. And so this was my amateurish use of it, and that was simply having a set of macros I wrote where the prompts were pre-set up. So when students in a class of 50, not 50,000, but 50 to 200, would all submit that 1 or 2 sentences, it would then start to, I'd pre-prompt it before class and say, look for, I'll show you some examples, but find patterns of agreement, disagreement, find confusions, and show me them almost immediately. And so, for example, I begin my Gov 10 class in democratic theory with a classic lifeboat case. There's too many of us on a lifeboat. We have to throw off 10 people. What decision procedure should we use? And they simply answer. They give a couple sentences. And so I tell it in a pre-prompted way, sort the answers and find outliers. Find that interesting student who probably wouldn't have raised their hand, but I can use that intuition in a special way. So here's an example. I said sort the following student responses. I did find 2 outliers. And you can tell, of course, any number. And so it immediately finds a series of groupings, has the students, and says some of them are volunteers, some are using other kinds of criteria, but it is excellent at doing that kind of grouping, and some are more majoritarian style, and then here are the two outliers, notice. And I can then look at that instantaneously and ask those people. Notice I'm not cold calling on them at this point. It's kind of a lukewarm call. They know it's coming, right? And I can ask them to further elaborate. So this is not in exchange for class discussion. This is an entry point to class discussion. And the outliers are often the people I would have missed in a normal class discussion model. They're often people who have a humility, a kind of a humble touch, and they wouldn't have advertised themselves as having something important to say. But we can find them sometimes with this model. I can ask it through prompts to form breakout groups by agreement. Let's say I want to huddle them by their agreement on a particular answer. I can say sort the groups into groups of 2 or 3, and then it will do that. And this was a question where it's looking at questions of privilege and personal character. It was imagining a letter they got that told them they'd been accepted to Harvard, but it had nothing to do with their merit, pulled out of my colleague Michael Sandel's book. How would they react to that letter? And so it's organizing them, and it leads to discussion if I want to pair them in likes. But I can also form breakout groups by disagreement, and do it in a way that is that diversifies the groups. Sort these response groups of 4 that represent a diversity of answers, and it will do that instantaneously as well. We can also interpret a passage together. So I put up a passage about Rousseau, classically his difficult views about sovereignty and the general will, and I can even in my prompt tell it, look for patterns of confusion. This is the student's red phone. I always say that students who raise their hand never like to say, I'm utterly confused by what you're saying right now. But if I notice it's not a single person, there's a pattern of either myself or Rousseau, or both of us, being confused, I can harness that. So here's an example of it. It found a certain different ways they were finding this passage difficult. And notice it's summarizing their own report. So it's giving me much more bite-sized dashboard-like information than if I look at their longer response, which I love because they're not discouraged to share more, but I can't read all that up here in real time. This summarizes it, not perfectly, but impressively well. And the question is this all about scaling? If you're teaching a seminar of 15 to 20 students, does this have any use? I find it sometimes does, because even in that setting, I can, first of all, having every student engaged in answering can be valuable even in the smallest scale settings. And even eyeballing a dozen responses will take time. But if I say, find the answer what is not like the others here in a response, that may be something I can use, and I have played with it in a smaller seminar setting as well. So here's my dream, and if anyone wants to help code it for me, I want not my own version of hackish version, a genuine GTP app that would do this kind of sortition, and that would be built in a single app where students could be prompted, and it would still have that legislative record, right? I would still know what they thought over the semester, but I could also use it as a dashboard for real time. So I'm going to end by asking a question for all of you. If you could answer the question, how do you think chatbots will change the classroom? And if you just type poll.com, other minds, give me a couple sentences, and then at the end, when we're all done huddled in the corner, I'll show you different ways we can sort all that data in basically instantaneously. And you can also text it to the message, or you can use the barcode. But and I don't actually think that we really need to use poll everywhere for this. It's really just asking for free-form answers, so it doesn't really leverage that technology, but it's what I've used, and I'd love you to take advantage of that at the end. So I'll be at the end with different ways of sorting this out, but please do answer, and I should let the others present. So thank you so much.